Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Edufuturists podcast, recording live this Thursday night. We're on to episode 107. Wow, yeah, 107 episodes. It's good to be back as well. I haven't been on the last couple of episodes.
Why have you not been on, Dan?
Well, my partner and I had our second child a couple of weeks ago. So
congratulations!
It's been quite a few weeks. I thought the first one was tough. But now we've got two children. I was going to say under one there, but the first one's just turned one. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
What about year 8 on a Friday afternoon? No,
like didn't even come close. I'm on paternity, but I popped into work the other day because we had Ofsted in, and it was like a holiday. Seriously, like a day with Ofsted was like a holiday. And I'm not even doing most of the work. Julia's doing most of the work. So,
to be fair, they probably make more sense than your kids. In fairness, probably understand a bit more about education. But let's not go there anyway.
You're getting critical already, Steve.
Always. Sorry, I was on my soapbox. I literally piled the boxes up really high last week, so I'm going to try and come down off the rafters.
So we're on. This has been recorded live on YouTube, but majority of our audience subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and iTunes, so you can go and do that as well.
Yeah, don't forget, you can head over to youtube.com/Edufuturists and subscribe if you already haven't. I think we're creeping up. Are we close to 300 now?
Yeah, 300, yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing. We haven't started our YouTube channel that long ago. You can always head over to twitter.com/Edufuturists, follow us, get news and updates, and it'll post and let you know when our next podcast or live event is coming out. Don't forget to go and head to the merch store, Edufuturists/merch as well. Don't forget to do that.
Yeah. We've got some events coming up. You know that we like to do events as well as doing a podcast. The next set we're going to be doing in partnership with C Learning and Google for Education. And these are going to be looking at Google Enterprise for Education and shared experiences and impact. So we've got 3 coming up. So dates for your diary. The first one is next week, 24th of September, from 1:30 p.m. And then we've got, and that's for leaders in schools and colleges. And we've got teachers on the 22nd of October, same time, and security panel on the 26th of November. To find out about all those things, go to enterprise.edufuturists.com.
Yeah, our special guest tonight is Professor Mick Waters. He is best known as former director of the curriculum at the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, where he gained a heroic reputation amongst teachers by making the curriculum relevant and meaningful.
Yeah, he's a former head teacher. Mick is passionate about the role of education, improving the life chances of pupils. He's been described as being down to earth with the ability to see innovation in terms of its impact on the learners themselves.
Mick currently works with the schools in the West Midlands of England in Raising Standard, and he's the author of, and we're sure we'll get into this today, Thinking Aloud on Schooling.
Mick, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Lovely to be with you.
It's really looking forward to this one. We probably about 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you were aware of this or not. Are you on Twitter, Mick?
No, I don't do Twitter.
I thought you were. I was trying to tag you, but I couldn't find it.
No.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, the transcript of a talk that you gave in 2013 kind of went a bit viral on Twitter. I don't even know if you're aware of this, but it was in the Guardian, and lots of people were retweeting it around. And I think a lot of people thought it was from 2020 and what's happening this year, because it was down to a T, kind of describing not only kind of what this current situation is, but also kind of what needs to happen in our opinion as well. So a lot of people were retweeting thinking, and I was one of them thinking, oh, this is brilliant. And that's when I emailed you and said, and I don't know if you remember, but I emailed you and said, I've just read your transcript. It'd be great to get you on. And then I realized it was actually 7 years old. But yeah, so it's great to get you on, and just to kind of to delve into that really, because you and we were just talking before we went live, weren't we, about how you've kind of been at this a while now in terms of pushing for this change in education, and we're kind of, it feels like we might be at a bit of a cusp with everything that's going on in the world. But yeah, what's your take on that, Mick?
Oh, well, it was interesting because I got lots of contact from people saying they'd read my article in the Guardian, and I thought, that's good. Perhaps I can do another one without putting pen to paper. But then I realised it was that thing from 7 years ago. What it actually was, now and again I get invited, as do a lot of people, to the House of Commons to talk at one of their seminars. MPs and Lords get together, and I did something there. So I took the opportunity then in 2013, you tell me, to talk with them about why politicians perhaps meddle too much in education and what we can do differently. So it's pretty risky thing to do in the House of Commons to tell people that maybe they aren't doing it right, but it seemed all right. And basically, the premise of the article is that all the talk is just that we can't keep going on with education policy vested in an individual or a small group of people who simply keep shoving it in the direction they want to go for dubious motives sometimes. I don't think anybody's not trying to do the best by children, but the policy direction is so often to do with short-term gain. It's to do with the party's need. It's to do with their personal credibility in terms of career prospects. So we've got to get away from that. And it was just actually sort of pointing towards things like some sort of national council for education, or schooling as I called it, which of course a lot of people are now saying is what we need to take us forward given all the stresses we're under at the moment. So it's been interesting to see it come back.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that as well. I wanted to get to that bit about the National Council for Schooling, because I think you're absolutely right. If we aren't necessarily, some people call us political, maybe we are, I don't know. But one of the, we probably are. But one of the things that we've talked about is an education policy that changes by party, and then changes even within parties, depending on who the education secretary is, or it feels like we're playing about with something that shouldn't necessarily be played about with in the same way. That doesn't mean we shouldn't innovate and we shouldn't trial new things, but it feels like we do a bit too much of that, as you said, tinkering or meddling. What do you mean by a national council for schools? Why do you think that might be necessary?
Well, it's like all these things. It's an idea, a concept, and you have to work on the detail. I think it's a national council ought to be something that pulls together the ideas, thinking, the commitment of various agencies. There are a lot of people saying we should have one now. So at the last election, the Labour Party's manifesto said we need some sort of national council. They may have called it something different. Similarly, the Liberal Democrats offered a view that we need a bigger consensus. My thing is that you've got to have politicians involved a bit, because that's where the money comes from, and it's right to say they've got an investment in it, but maybe their role stops at deciding and determining the money and sits with long-term strategy. I think you could elect a council. I think one of the risks in what I read being proposed by the other political parties is basically you put together the usual suspects, the great and the good. You have some people from higher education. You have a few selected people from schools, and actually what it is another version of politics. And that council would then change every time the politician change, because they want a new mate involved, which is always their problem. And what might be better is to elect a council, and I wouldn't do it in the way that they do for police and crime commissioners, with the sort of location constituency basis. I'd just simply say, if you can get over so many voters to vote for you using modern technology, then you can be on the council. So it can be members of the public, it can be members of the non-education world, it can be people from education, business, industry. But what we're about is the best outcome for youngsters across the country, moving forward into a new era, a new world. Really, we got so much of education policy is looking over its shoulder, trying to put right what they got wrong last time. Why aren't we really determining the sorts of things we need to face in the future and building a policy around that and keeping consistency even when government changes? So if government changes, that's fine, but the council keeps going and you go from there. So I think you can elect one. It shouldn't be regionalised. It should be people having a capacity to build an advocacy of interest and go from there.
And I guess that's where, when Ben was mentioning not stopping the innovation, I guess the innovation would come partly from the council then as well. It doesn't have to come from whoever's.
I think we've got to get much clearer in education about what innovation is. So innovation, on the one hand, is small-scale innovation in a classroom or in a workshop with a teacher moving something forward. And then there's system innovation, where you need to build a picture of whether something works or not. And there's some of the practice innovation in schools, colleges, and right next to youngsters. We need to trial more, really work hard on, a bit like NICE does for medical developments, that you check the feasibility, check there are no side effects, and we would stop some of these. What happens in education is you get this wave of innovation where everybody's doing something for a bit, and you say, what this is catching on, why is this happening? And they tell you, and then 2 years later the wave's gone back and there are little rock pools of practice that are left, and people are on to the next bit of innovation, the branded innovation. And I think we've got to get much more clinical, and maybe a council could set up something that said, let's really validate, fund, research, properly accredit innovation, so that we innovate with confidence. At the moment in education, people who are innovative are often seen as either a bit maverick, or they're the ones with a new silver bullet. We aren't really clear whether it works or not. So I think we've got to be much more calculating on innovation.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that would kind of, I know we on this podcast we try to showcase all the innovation that kind of inspires us around the world. So we've had schools like Agora in the Netherlands on who are really kind of have been given that space within their education system to innovate and to experiment to a certain extent, and we're kind of always having that conversation, aren't we, about why can't we have that kind of thing here? Why can't we have pockets of, like you said, the pockets of innovation where let's say if it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But we there's no harm in let's saying if it does work, and this could then be used elsewhere. And I guess that council idea that you talk about would allow for that without having that kind of new person's in charge, new idea. Everybody has to adopt it, and I guess you see that even being passed down through the structure as well, don't you? Down through to the local authority, through to now maths as well. That right, this is the way we do it, and this is the way everyone teaching and learning gets done like this. This is how we do. This is how we prepare for an exam, and it just kind of stifles those natural leaders in the classroom who might be thinking, actually, why can't we do it another way? Why can't we experiment?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time in schools and colleges, in classrooms with folk, and what I see is some amazingly innovative practice, some really clever practice where people have got, what's the problem? What am I trying to do about it? How do I take it on? But we have such a job getting that to scale, because the policy direction presses everybody so much, and then you get, if you look at what creates the impetus for change and innovation, there are government policy, funding, people with an axe to grind or a cross to bear, or a torch to carry, and then there are the notion of what's inspected or tested creates innovation, and a lot of innovation in individual schools comes around because people are picking things up on the inspection wavelength that they think is what's being looked for. That's not innovation, that's just dancing to somebody's tune. And you need to be more clinical objective than that.
I think with schools fall under that, especially with Ofsted and the way that they guide and what advising basically what they're looking for is around cultivating crop, and innovation isn't coming from shoots of practice and been led by those innovative practice in the classroom. That people are worried because when it comes to Ofsted, they're judged in a certain way, and they have to conform, and I just think we're struggling because of it. I think this whole silent corridors thing and the behaviour policy and those kind of things, that actually innovation is very different, and we have a very diverse curriculum across our college, as an example, where what it looks like in creative arts is very different to what it looks like in IT, and is very different to what it looks like in a different curriculum, maths and English. Innovation is not one thing, and use of technology or whatever is not one thing. And I think as soon as you start saying you must do this and you must do it in this way, the outstanding practice goes, because people are just shackled by the rules and regulations and the conformity.
The conformity thing is
interesting,
because Ofsted would say that they don't have any particular model, they subscribe to no agenda, and so on. I feel sorry for Ofsted because they just can't get it right, can they? They've been going for all this time and they still can't agree on a framework. It changes every time there's a new breeze, and the challenge really is that. If your Ofsted inspection comes along and they judge your school or college to be super duper, they give examples of why that's the case, and then heads and teachers are looking to see what it is that they're giving as the example, and that becomes the practice that starts to become the new orthodoxy. And then, fair enough to Ofsted, they say we never said that was the practice in the first place, but actually they hinted at it. So over time, you saw this stuff with multicoloured marking and, marking backwards and things like that. It just becomes a trick that you think you've got to perform when you're being watched. And so the pressure to do that. When I was at QCA, I had a little sort of exchange with the chief HMI at the time about how we get curriculum to be more useful in schools. And I was talking about the impact of Ofsted inspection, and I said, please can you give me 3 reports on super duper schools? I think they were called excellent at the time, which have now become outstanding. Please can you give me 3 outstanding reports and let me put 1 sentence in each of them, and I'll show you the impact you have. Because I wanted to take 3 reports. They wouldn't let me do it because they're statutory documents, but I want to take 3 reports on good schools and put in a sentence about roller skating. I wanted to put roller skating as the introduction of roller skating has been seen to improve behaviour across all year groups. And in another report to put parents have appreciated the way roller skating has been made available to children, and this has improved attendance. And in another report say that the youngsters have really appreciated the way roller skating has been brought into the curriculum, and this has given them the impetus to enjoy free time or something. And my view was that if you put that in 3 reports on outstanding schools, what would happen would be that all these school leaders and college leaders reading the reports would go, oh, look, we're not doing roller skating. So roller skating would start to spread all over England. And what people don't realise is that inspectors also look at reports to see what they should be looking for, because they need the examples. So when they came into a school or college, they'd be saying, are you doing roller skating? And when you said, oh yes, we're already doing it, they'd say, is that inline blades or is that, corner wheels or what? And gradually, there would be more and more refinement of roller skating. And my conjecture was that within probably 2 terms, you would have roller skating happening in schools all over England because of the impact of this germ in an Ofsted report. And I was never allowed to do it, but I still believe you can, if you want to spread practice, you put it in an Ofsted report. I mean, I think there's the impact of that is massive, and that's why a national council could start to rein in the sort of the exaggerations that happen across the country in various aspects of policy. I think the the Endowment Foundation does some good stuff on researching, with control groups and what happens comparing two approaches. And that's the sort of thing we should be following, but it doesn't have the impact of somebody's inspection down the road or somebody's inspection nearby. It ripples through the system in a big way.
Yeah, I think we've got a friend, Joe Fletcher Saxon, who and the team that work in research ed and the other teams around making sure that the ideas around what we do should not just be a whim and an idea that somebody's had, or innovation isn't. It is about trying things, but it isn't ridiculous things just because somebody says we should do this and therefore that's the right answer. And we talk about that in terms of tools quite a lot. Like some people jump on and say, "Oh, we've got to use Google Forms because I've heard about these people using Google Forms," or we'll use Teams because everybody else, the school down the road, the guy who's standing using Teams. These things might not be a causal relationship. It's often the coincidental sometimes, or whatever it goes. I think you're absolutely right. I love that idea. I would have loved to have seen the resurgence in roller skating. It would have been brilliant. What to your role at the QCA was a senior role, a very, very important role in education in the UK. What was that? What did you do there? I'm intrigued because obviously you're passionate about curriculum. What was it as exciting as I think it is, or was it loads of policy meetings?
Well, prior to that, I've been chief education officer in Manchester. I've enjoyed every job I've done. It's been, when you're in the twilight of a career and you look back and you think there's not one of those jobs I didn't enjoy. That's not bad, is it? So I'm one of the cheerful people that you'll meet. But when I went to QCA, I was appointed a director of curriculum. I went there because I really enjoyed Manchester. I really liked it. But do you remember they were putting together social care and education? And I thought, goodness me, it's hard enough running a load of schools, and I don't know anything about social care. And I was wondering where my future lay. And this job at curriculum came along. They just come. It's fate, isn't it? And I thought I'll do that. When I got there, they appointed me as director of curriculum for England, and I thought, well, I wonder what you do then, because we've got a curriculum. What is there to direct? And it was really interesting. And of course, QCA was an example. I mean, Tories got rid of it, but it's an example of something that was set up as a National Curriculum Council in 1988. And when it had written the curriculum, all the people there were still there, and they said, "Well, you better do something else now. Do some guidance." And when they'd done the guidance, they do some more guidance, do some non-statutory, and people are doing things. But when I did get there, we were doing the Key Stage 3 review leading into diplomas, which Tomlinson had recommended a few years before I arrived. So, recommendations take time to come to policy. And the Labour government had said, we're going to review Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 in respect of examination qualifications. So I was fundamentally involved with reviewing Key Stage 3 to lead to the diplomas that were being developed and piloted. And I thought that was going to be a really, really big thing. So what I did, there was a bit of policy meeting, but I always believed that curriculum on its own is an odd thing to talk about. Curriculum sits with pedagogy, curriculum sits with leadership, additional learning needs. Curriculum sits with so many aspects of schooling that if you just sit in your building and do that, it's a bit silly. So first of all, I tried to forge links with things like the National College for School Leadership, the FE councils and so on. I tried to forge links with communities of education, so professional bodies that looked at, the NATE and the arts, the national bodies for different things, all those. But I also believe that the place to make sure the curriculum made a difference was in schools and colleges. So I would spend a lot of time working either on conferences with teachers and leaders or in the schools and colleges trying to work out where things should go. So I got all my teams doing that. So they spent low end of time out of the office in the schools. And I think, especially around the Key Stage 3 review, we built quite a groundswell of view that if we put this in the hands of the schools, they could make work the general principles that were there, and they could take it forward and make this curriculum work for youngsters. I thought there was a lot of enthusiasm. The diplomas, they were developing on a sort of pilot basis, and then they were used. There's 2 cohorts of children in about 15 parts of the country who did diplomas, and they got the qualifications. So where they are now, it would be really interesting to see. But they were supposed to bring the sort of academic and practical learning together, vocational learning together, to create something that was really relevant to the working life that they would experience. And of course, now we've got people walking around talking about M levels and T levels and trying to get youngsters to have really good linked together academic and practical vocational work. And you think, well, they were doing that all those years ago. And I think that's the result of a change of government and, Gove's obstinacy and his behaviour that probably wasn't much use to many people but Gove. And the danger with that is that you're retreading tracks that have been traced already 10 years later. And what a shame for the kids in this country that they've missed out. And, it's just a shame. But time at QCA was great. I went in so many schools and colleges and nursery units, and I learned a lot. And I hope I made use of it.
It's interesting what you say there. It's kind of like, and just going back to the political thing about how new governance, we start the cycle again and have to learn all the same mistakes. But I get the feeling, and I'm gonna go a little bit political here, that a lot of mistakes aren't being realised this time, and it kind of goes back to your viral transcript from a few weeks ago, in that everything from kind of the start of the Tory government back in 2010, was it, to now 10 years later, that not much has changed. Not much is changing, and we're kind of being forced at a crossroads here, where coronavirus has hit. The whole technology question, even though it's kind of been kept on the sidelines for the last 10 years, it has had to come back into play. You've also got people like Dominic Cummings, who was one of Gove's advisors at the DfE, now kind of advising the whole government. Where do you see this going, Mick? Where do you think, are we just going to have to wait for another new government, or could we get some realistic change for the good, albeit at the behest of the current government? But could things start to move in terms of especially your vision that we
well, I think we're at a funny time, aren't we? Who would want to be in charge of this thing at the minute? And I wouldn't for a minute think they're not doing the best they can, but I wish they'd ask some other people to help them. I think the biggest problem that the current lot have got is they want to do everything themselves, and they want to centralise everything. And so you only have to look at the decisions made about the guidance. It's guidance for everybody, as opposed to really nuanced guidance. It's the same, the same basic tenet for a small nursery school with very few children and a massive, college with young adults. The principles might be held firm, but we could look at how you nuance that in the way you work. I think there's a real feeling of Klingon at the minute. The Secretary of State is clinging. It's like a climber going up a crag face. He's hanging on with that hand and reaching out for somewhere else so that he doesn't fall, rather than to make progress. I think there's too much at the minute which is about not messing it up as opposed to making it better. And one of the problems with crises is that people dig in and try and hold and wait for the storm to pass. And that's not very good for the kids in the system at the minute. That we could be looking forward and having a more productive thought about where we would need to go. So it is, the trouble with politics is it's person-based, and the current one isn't very apt. So what you get is inept through to somebody. I mean, the last one, do you remember? This is interesting whether you remember the last one, but Damien Hines, he was everybody's friend for a bit, because the one before, and you're always making up for what's gone on. I thought Justine Greening was the best one we'd had for ages as Secretary of State, because she understood some fundamentals about education not being on its own. She understood some things about youngsters' need and deprivation. She had a clarity about purpose that I thought was deep commitment, and I'm afraid too many of them don't give an impression of deep commitment. So what we've got at the minute is lots of platitudes about heroic teachers, followed by ridiculous statements about dealing with them, dealing with people in schools, or things that sort of talk down to people in the way that they're presented. I think you look at other countries. I mean, I know Scotland had the problem over the exams, but their integrity in dealing with it quickly and, almost sort of apologising properly for what had gone on and then trying to work it out was respected by people in Scotland. In Wales, at the minute, I don't know anything about Northern Ireland, I'll just say that for a start. In Wales, of course there are problems, but there's a real respect in the teaching community for the openness of their government and their minister for trying to help them to help the minister to sort out the things that have been done. And there's a difference between central responsibility and central control of every detail. And I think we've got, a long way to go. We fob people off too much, and we should be a bit more open and just push it on a bit.
Agreed. It could be worse. It could have been Mrs. Thatcher. She was Education Secretary for nearly 4 years, weren't she? So, but we won't go there. Yeah, no. I think the
save the farmers.
Yes.
Farmers were paid for milk to feed children to build the bones. Now farmers aren't paid for milk, and they have to pour it down the drain. That's been an improvement. But there we are.
Well, it's brilliant being able to talk to you, because obviously you've had a role in educational leadership within the school setting, as well as being at kind of at policy level, and you have seen, like you said, you've been in nursery units, you've seen schools, colleges, universities, all that whole spectrum, and you are seeing some things. Probably some great things and some probably not great things over that time. But the book you wrote was a very clever. For me, I love the play on words where you called it thinking aloud in schools. So, like, obviously, the play on the words there. But what was the book about, really, for those people who haven't necessarily read around that?
Well, over the years, I've written various books on schooling, usually aimed at leadership or teaching on various aspects. But I've been asked over and over again to write a sort of thoughts on what was going on, and I'd never had time. But then I had a little period of illness. I was going to be off work for about 3 months, and I thought, here's my chance, I'll write it. So all I did was think, let's think about the system and all the images I've got of it, and think how it works and what could be better. So there were a series of headings: thinking aloud on autonomy, thinking aloud on politics, thinking aloud on curriculum, thinking aloud on teaching, leadership, and so on. And I just wrote a little bit, like a little essay on each one that drew out what the issues were, and then what the current problem is, or where the strength is, and where we could go from there. So each chapter finishes with a little, each essay finished with sort of things you can do if you're a teacher or a head. What I find interesting looking at it, because it's 2013, wasn't it? It's quite a long while ago. If you go back through it, you can see lots and lots of the issues that keep coming to the surface being voiced in there. And sometimes they're big ones like the National Council, but sometimes they're quite small things. And I mean, there's a lot in there about youngsters' aspiration. And in the book, I talk about, aspiration is just not about higher grades and better jobs. Aspiration is about a feeling of worth and a feeling of value and a feeling of contribution. It's about personal strength almost. And of course, over the years, you watch these youngsters who are drawn into negative life experiences, whether it's grooming or gun crime or robbery or county lines, all those awful things that none of us would want to happen to youngsters. And I think you hear people saying, well, we've got to do more about their self-worth and their self-image, and you think, yeah, I wrote about that. And there are quite a lot of things about, endlessly chasing. The book ends with everybody chasing everybody else round in a circle. So we're all chasing, Ofsted set off, politicians set off, and then Ofsted chased them, and the head teachers chased them, and we're all running around looking over our shoulders because we're chasing data. And nobody can get out of this because we're all wondering who's chasing whom. And in the end, the sky falls in. And actually, COVID's a bit like the sky falling in. You've got to rethink. Bit like you were saying a few minutes ago with, the blended learning. Or we've been on about that for 30 years. 1980, computers started to emerge in schools, and only now have we really grabbed it. And we've learned a bit. We haven't solved it, but we couldn't half use what we know now to take it forward. And so the book was just a sort of reflection on where we were, and it kept me busy for a couple of months while I sort of got my health back again. And it's done well. All the proceeds went to charity, and the charity was Shelter Box, which looks after people when there's been a national disaster, a local disaster, and it sends them a tent and a box of stuff to keep them going for 2 weeks. It's been really quite lovely to think it's helped all these people over that time. So, yeah, it's a nice book. I enjoy it. I still read it now and again. Funny that, reading that stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and that touched upon me in terms of the charity bit. But I think what you were just saying there is that feeling of belonging and the feeling of self-worth for pupils. And I work in a city college, and a massive percentage of our students that come from really deprived areas, and we have a problem at the end of the day, and it's not really a problem, where the kids often don't want to go home. They don't want to leave, and it's all of that because they've built a community, they've built this friendship group, but because they're feeling they're doing something valued and they're actually enjoying it, whether it's the social experience, whether it's a learning. But I think a lot of our teachers, when they first come and they've not taught in that environment before, struggle with that. It's like, why are they still here? Why are they not going home? And it's that whole element of feeling valued, feeling like they're doing something, but also their lives at home are pretty terrible. And actually, it's their release from that, and it's pretty sad, I think, really. And it's something that's
there's several things out of that. I mean, first of all, there are parts of our country where, and there can be pockets or there can be big swathes, but there are parts of the country where many youngsters live a pretty sad life, actually. And, I don't want to be too political, but since the Tories have been in, every indicator's got worse. And if you look at the National Audit Commission, National Statistics Group last week, talking about the number of children who are living in real serious disadvantage. It's in the millions of children, and you can formally organise for that to address it in various projects, or you really set people together to work for these youngsters and with these youngsters. And I think in schools and colleges, there's only 3 things you can really work on if you want quality, and one of them is the people that the youngsters meet. And if I were running the place again, it's who am I appointing and what are they like? Because we all know that the adult who can build a relationship with the youngster and the adult who can show this youngster they matter is the one that in the end helps that youngster to get the most out of themselves. And I think where we are, and I've been in politics for a bit in education, is people think you've got to put it in the children and get it out again. You've got to put it in the youngster and get it out again. When actually we've got to get the youngster to believe in themselves, to go both looking for it and getting it out. They're learning, not just intellectual learning, but their social, emotional, physical learning has got to be much more in their compass. And one of my worries about the impact of the lockdown is, first of all, what we know is that the youngsters who cope best during the lockdown would seem to be those who've been in contact with somebody from school or college, I imagine. I don't know so much about that. Where the school has made it possible for the youngster to be in contact frequently, regularly, with at least one adult who they know. And that seems to have made a massive difference on return. The ones who have had an adult, whether it's a teacher or a first aider or a caretaker, where big secondary schools have managed to find somebody to just touch base with a youngster now and again. And I think the other thing, the thing that's worrying me is as they go back to school, the message is being given that, you teachers, you're the operatives, get that learning into those units of production, those children, as quickly as you can, because they've got behind and they need filling up again. And, in the lockdown, the ones that have coped the best, it would seem, this will never be researched, it's a shame, but I reckon that the ones that have coped the most seem to, from all the accounts I'm getting, be the ones who have been the most resourceful, been able to manage themselves, have been able to organise their time well. So, okay, they get bored sometimes, but they work out how to get out of boredom. They know how to use time. They know when to have a break. They know when to do something extendedly. They know when to shorten it and make it easy. So they've got a control of themselves. But we know that those youngsters who were more inventive, making up games, learning an instrument, doing things like that, those youngsters who built what we seem to call self-regulation have succeeded in coping the best. So shouldn't we in this period be teaching our teenagers, particularly our teenagers, about self-regulation and how to manage in case they're locked down again, instead of sitting them down, facing the front with a mask, smelling a disinfectant and stuffing stuff into them? It fills an image of schooling that people have carried since the 19th century, but actually it's not what they need moving into a period where it's uncertain how schooling and how life's going to be for the next little while. And I think we've got to really work on the grown-ups, the teachers and others, in the sense of you're a trusted group and relationships are everything. They're one of the three things that mean for quality. And secondly, we've got to be level with the youngsters even more. I mean, it is interesting because behaviour policy, they reckon youngsters will follow a policy better when they behave and when they understand it. It's interesting how typically they are better following social distancing and all the things to do with that around school because it's been explained over and over again for them. I think we've got a chance, but we'll probably miss it. And those kids that you're on about who'd rather be at school, as a society, we should be making that better for them so they stay longer in school or college. Stay as long as you like. I'd have flexible schooling. I'd have places open longer, staff in longer. Staff on rota basis and all that sort of thing. But how do we adapt the place of learning so that they can better associate? And at the same time, what's your social policies then and your health policies to make it better for kids back at home? And some of this poverty trap stuff has got to break. We can't do everything, but we've got to put pressure on government.
I really hope that kind of these last few weeks and the coming months and whatever happens, that a lot of people are learning that lesson. I know you talk a lot about, I've heard you talk about how learning isn't just about what you learn, but it's how you learn as well, and how the school or the college has got a responsibility to to show students how to learn, so that because they're going to be learning forever, and we need to equip them for when they leave the institution and they're moving on to the world of work. But also, if it seems like it's just half of the picture, doesn't it? That showing kids how to learn, we also need to teach them and work with them to say, well, how do they live as well? How is their well-being kept regulated? And having that as part of an actual curriculum is something that I know in this country, and I can't really speak for other countries, but we've avoided that really. Even though we've kind of pushed in the personal development kind of things, it's still kind of left on the periphery, and it's still the curriculum. And I guess that goes back to our favorite conversation about, well, at the end of the day, it's exams, and it's the exam system, it's the industrial style school. But actually, hopefully, and I really hope that what we're learning in these few weeks, and I think these few weeks here are probably more vital than those few months in lockdown, is that we need to do more of that.
I think there's something about when you say youngsters need to learn how to learn, some of that is taught to them, and most of it is caught or cultivated. We help youngsters to grow by the way we are with them, and one of the reasons they like staying behind at college or school after school and they won't go home is because actually they're intrigued by how grown-ups are and how the teachers they're with and the other adults they're with are as people, and just that fascination with a different community of folks. And I think we've really got to work on less formal aspects of learning and see teachers as architects of pupils' lives, not as providers of exam results. And when you're an architect, you scope it out. You don't do every detail. We've got to get our youngsters thinking that these things have a greater currency than the age of 16 or 18. And the number of teenagers I meet who say, I'm never going to have to do history again, I can pack it up now. And you think, well, what a shame, all those years so that you can stop. It should be opening a door, not shutting it. And but while you treat teachers as operatives and measure their output, it's a very hard thing to break.
And do you think that potentially is because of our exam system, that students see that as the end goal, that at the end of their 16 years they sit an exam and the information, like you said, is what we put into them is then regurgitated out, and that's it, that's their end point, and there isn't actually a drive to get students to be passionate about the learning. It's more about, here's what you need to do, and then let's see what your end result is, and then we'll make a judgment on how good you are.
Yeah. I'm not against exams.
No.
I think exams are good tickets into various avenues that you want to explore, and I think the problem has been that you mustn't forget that years ago it wasn't good, and a lot of youngsters got really fed up through the teenage years and actually were being penned into school and kept there against their wish or need, and seeing no fruit in it. And so what was brought in as an exam as a potential qualification for every child, the GCSE, was a good step and a positive step to try and give a purpose. But the trouble was, it became the only purpose when it became clear that some schools are better than others. So now, because schools are compared with each other, the aim to get the best results outweighs the roundedness of education. So I think we struggle to get a balance. I think it's about avoiding polarities. It's about avoiding this or that. It's about saying, what's the balance between these things that will take us forward? And it would be good if we could just get exams back in balance. I'm not saying they're a bad thing at all. I think youngsters have to see a purpose in them rather than just fueling the school's results. When you say the youngsters realise how important they are over the last 20 years, and not just Tories but Labour before, they have, exam results have been the measure of everything. And you go into classrooms and you hear youngsters being told, you'll need this for your exam, and they think without that, that's it. I mean, I think it's interesting. It was only in 1947 that the school leaving age was raised from 40. So until 1947, which is 70 17, the children of 14 left school and went to work. So they were deemed men and women, very immature men and women, but they were men and women. They went to work and were treated like men and women. Woodstead had an induction. So they go off to various jobs. And they were still 4 years away from the vote. Oh, no, 7 years at that point. A long way from the vote. They were a long way from being able to get married, and they were still a long way from being, in theory, allowed to smoke and drink. That sort of adultness, but they were still treated like adults. Over the years, we've raised school leaving age twice, and so now we keep youngsters in school until they're 18 and 19, or in education until 19. And at the same time, people have matured differently. So the children who are now 18 and 19 are actually bigger humans than they were when they were 18 and 19 all those years ago. So what we've now got are people who are physically more men and women, more grown up in so many aspects of their life, able to marry, able to smoke, able to drink, still at school, and we haven't moved on the way we treat them since the 1940s. We still think, come in there in a bunch of children called a class, listen to somebody going on at you, write it down, turn it back, have it marked, and in the end you might get a qualification. Well, you'll get a qualification. How good it is, we don't know. And I think we haven't matured the schooling approach very much at all. Forgive me if you're a teacher listening. I know you don't do that, get them in and stick it down on, but the message is that's what children need. They need this sort of input of information and skill even, rather than a relevance and a way we do it. And what the best teachers do is they create relevance, they create application, they create insights for youngsters into the real world that excite them. So I just think all the pressures on schools and colleges is not to treat youngsters as growing people and adults, but to treat them as units.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions actually from our listeners. So I've just put one up on the screen. So I'll go through it. So Jerry Smith, what do you think, or what do you see as the defining characteristics of the 21st century curriculum?
That's a good one. It's whether you mean the curriculum for the child or for a school or college. So if you're talking about for the school and the college, then it's what's the offer. For the child, it's how do you make your way through learning. I think for the youngster, the curriculum has to have an element of planned pathway so they can see where it leads, but it also has to, so that's a map, if you like, but at the same time there has to be this opportunity for orienteering, so that sometimes you're going downhill with the wind and you can grab learning as you go, and sometimes it's a struggle and you're going uphill making sense of it. And there has to be a sense in the learning journey for this youngster that they have a volition, a choice, and an option, but it's not a restrained option. So that what they get is the notion that learning's out there to be had, and I'll explore a bit at a time and sample it and so on. And I think sampling is something we don't do enough with our youngsters to give them a chance. Now, from the school's point of view, I think the curriculum is about looking at what the 21st century so far is offering us and trying to predict further. So the first thing we know is youngsters are going to live for a very long while. So we were just hearing about a child born recently, earlier in the podcast. That child's probably going to live to 80 or 100 as a sort of starting point for thinking about that. The chances are that our world is not being dominated by nations so much, but actually by other things. So some global corporations are bigger than nations, so there is another infrastructure. We have things like pandemics, which don't stop at borders, they go where they like. So we're living in a much smaller world and a much closer together world than we've ever lived in. The gap between rich and poor is closing. So this talk about closing the gap in terms of attainment, making a difference to social mobility might be a little bit suspect. So how do we create a curriculum that offers youngsters the chance to see possibilities in life beyond their social construct? How do you create networks for youngsters so that they can get into the avenues and areas of learning that give them the impetus for yet more learning. And into that comes subject disciplines. Subject disciplines are branches of understanding that we want them to explore. So I want children to know how science has changed the world and created side effects that damage civilization. I want them to know that history is about people trying to make a better world, but sometimes making a mess of it. I want them to know that geography is about understanding how to create a knowledge of using the planet to make the future a better place, or that mathematics is opportunity for seeing how pattern and shape and understanding comes together, or that engineering is, on the edge of something new every time you develop a new process. So I think the curriculum is a global thing for children. It's a thing in your school or college which meets the needs of your community. And for the child, they have to see it as a blend between a clear route on a map and an opportunity for orienteering. And given the 21st century, that orienteering ought to be spherical, not linear. So you can go up, down, outwards, inwards, and so on. But it's not about what it contains. There's always this argument about, are we having the Napoleonic Wars or not? You can have Napoleonic Wars if you like. You can have anything you want. But come on, there's too much learning to try and get it down on a few pieces of paper. I don't know if that's answered the question, but I've tried.
Yeah, I think it has. It's more than the content of the curriculum. It's the structure and the methodology and the model. There's a couple more questions. There's a question here from friend Johnny. He said, what opportunities does the pandemic present for a paradigm shift in systems thinking? Because I know we've kind of addressed some of it.
Yeah,
but
Johnny, I think it's a good question, and we ought to be looking for opportunities. That's what I was saying earlier about my worry about the current politics, is that they're hanging on and not looking for opportunity. There are several. Obvious one is the use of technology. I mean, there's been a lot of progress made. You have to be careful of generalizations because some of it isn't good. I've been looking at websites of what schools have been providing, and some of it's brilliant in that it offers openings for youngsters to learn in all sorts of contexts at home that are very different, and gives them practical ways into intrigue or practical ways into wonder and deeper learning and deeper concepts. But some of it is just repetitious stuff, and repetitious stuff's fine as long as you need it. I think so. IT needs exploring further, the use of digital learning. I think we could really use it for that. Again, it'll never be research, but I think, as I understand it, just talking to kids on, near where I live, but also youngsters in different schools where I've been in contact this last few weeks, lots of children during the lockdown have been logging on to schools' websites other than their own school, and they've been finding things to do that they've found interesting, curriculum stuff that schools have offered. And many of these youngsters are getting involved with work which is designed for year groups well in advance of their own age. So I've got lots of examples of primary children who have been doing year 7, 8 and 9 work. I've got loads of examples of year 8 and 9 youngsters who've been doing work around years 10 and 11, and they're just enjoying doing the work. And I think one of the steps forward we could make in terms of paradigm shift is saying, shall we rethink this notion that because you're born between 2 August, you always have to go around with everybody in that age group? And should we think about teachers being able to contact and work with different youngsters in different institutions, and youngsters having some volition in who they go and listen to? If I were running a school or college these days, I would have lots of optional things for youngsters. I would have lots of repeat sessions, lots of blockbuster sessions, so that you can come along and see that thing you like seeing, and I'll do it again. I mean, the one thing teenagers know is if they see a brilliant lesson in science, as they walk out, they're never going to see it again. Yet, if they want to watch something on digital media, they watch it over and over again because it's fascinating and they know what's coming next. I think there are loads of things about the way we use time, the way we use people, that could really change as a result of this learning on this pandemic. But what we haven't got is a task force working on it now that could spread ideas, innovation, and so on. Although, to be fair, the EEF are doing some on it, but it's typically about how people cope, not what we could do. And I think we've got to really look to the future, not always looking behind it. You know.
You reminded me there of I was in preparation for this. I was listening to one of the talks that you gave. I think it was last year, and I hope you don't mind. Can I share one of the slides from it? It's the one where you say what students might say, and it's like got a list of contradictions, because I think it's brilliant.
Oh,
and what you were just
I've got millions of slides. Show me it, otherwise I won't know what we're on about.
there it is there. So it's kind of covering up.
Yeah.
But I shared it on Twitter earlier today because I thought it was fantastic, and it just kind of highlights those areas where we still got a long way to go.
These are this is a set of questions. There's a lot more than this, but these are just ones I obviously used in a talk. In Wales, I do some policy work with their government, and they are really, if you're near the border of England and Wales, I'd look over the border into Wales. The Welsh decided that about 5 years ago, they decided enough's enough now. We can't keep chasing the next PISA results and the next annual set of test results. So they said we'll have a new curriculum and really aim for teaching children well. So they've developed a new curriculum, and that's just been produced after the 4 years with teachers working on it and teachers building it together. And they've looked at how we redefine what teachers are expected to do through standards. They probably wouldn't have called them standards, but if you got rid of standards, people would criticise you. So they've got a newly reframed standards. They've resorted teacher education. They've looked again at professional learning for teachers, and they're really looking at the way pedagogy can be innovative rather than constrained. And what's interesting, one of my policy pieces of work, I chaired a panel that reviewed teachers' pay and conditions because Wales had to take responsibility from their own as part of devolution. And one of the things that was in that was to do with pay and conditions. People were less interested in pay. They obviously pay matters, but what they wanted to talk about was conditions. And we had lots of people talking at the time about workload and all the stresses of teaching. And in the report that I eventually wrote, if you want to read it, it's called Teaching a Valued Profession, Teaching: a Valued Profession. And I wrote it on behalf of the panel, so it's not my report. But one of the things we said was that the Welsh government should spend some time thinking about how to reimagine schooling. How could we look at the habits, traditions, routines and rituals of schooling in a way that revisited what we've done for 150 years since state education began in 1870, and really think about how we can manage time and people, manage the school, the habits, routines, traditions and rituals, so that they're more family friendly, both for the youngsters and the families that the school serves, but also the people who work in them. So do schools have to keep working with those things? And those questions, I use those with separate. I was chairing the commission then for starting it off, and I used the questions with pupils, with students, with teachers, with parents, with community groups and so on. And the conversation about those questions was absolutely terrific. You know, why do we test everybody on the same day? Why do we close down a school hall for weeks on end and nobody can do PE or drama because the hall's out of action? You know, dance is off, and everybody's in there doing these. And surely people come to the point where they need the exam at different times. So are there not different ways of orchestrating some of the things we just take for granted? And you know, Wales is really, really having a look at this whole effort. And I think some of the things are coming through in the pandemic questions. Why? I mean, that exam mess wouldn't have been a mess if we didn't all have to do the same exam on the same day, at the same point, with the same questions. It's just bizarre. I mean, you wouldn't go for your driving. You know, everybody who wants to take a driving test has to do it on the same day, would you? You sort of ease them into the flow. It's crazy.
100% agree. I think when that whole argument was going on, and we were getting ministers saying things like, "Well, it's the best way to assess where students are at." I mean, yeah, it's the best way to assess where students are at that moment in time within that 3 hour window on that day. and in the context of their lives in that moment as well. But the next day, they might have got a better night's sleep. A week later, they might have learned a little bit more. A year later, they might have learned a hell of a lot more. And that student has to carry around that set of results for the rest of their life and hand it to every job and to show their results. It's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, any test is always only an indication. I mean, if you go for a blood pressure test, it might be up today and down tomorrow, or the other way around. So it's an indication at the moment. And the trouble we've got is that we sort of see it as a, as a statement of foreverness for some of these youngsters. I mean, you only have to look at the success of the Open University, who has given degrees to millions of people over the last 40 years, most of whom left secondary education or further education with a limited range of qualifications. They were deemed to be not passable at the equivalent of GCSE in those days. So there's more to qualification than simply turning up and jumping through the right hoop on the right day. But that's a thing in it. I think this push to go back to the exams quickly, because what was it, a mutant algorithm? I wasn't sure it was talking about at the time, but then I realized it was the exams. The mutant algorithm got in. Well, actually, don't seduce yourself to think that exams are accurate. They're a mutant algorithm too. Grade boundaries are done after the children have sat the exam. How can that be right? If you tell I go in classrooms where they're saying to youngsters, if you put this, you'll get 4 marks, and you only need so many marks for a grade, whatever. The truth is that isn't true. What happens is they mark the grade, they mark the first 1,000 or so, work out what the marks are, and then decide where to draw the line based on what they need the results to be. And what this year exposed wasn't anything to do with teacher assessment. It was to do with the fact that somebody decided after the event how many youngsters are allowed to pass and how many are not. And if the kids work this out, you'll have actually probably the most valuable thing that could come out of it is an expose of how it actually works.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're on that same wavelength. Mick, it's been a fantastic hour. Really has, and it would be great to get you on sometime in the future as well. Maybe hopefully when some of this mess is sorted out, so we can plan a way ahead. Well,
well, thanks for having me. If somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, who's this bloke who's been saying all this stuff? I spend my time in schools and colleges and nurseries and so on, and I just tell you that most of the people I meet are incredibly professional. Some of them have a distorted professionalism because they're marching to the tune of a distant drum rather than what they believe in. But the people who do what they believe in and articulate what they believe in to the benefit of the children make the difference. You just got to keep remembering that the youngsters we're working with now in classrooms, workshops, laboratories, libraries, wherever they are, they're the youngsters who in 20 years' time will remember in an instant what they did in our classrooms. Just bring it to mind and that'll be it. And on that being the case, we've got to keep doing good things with them, because they would want to remember good things, surely. So my message is just keep doing good things, believe in yourself, work together, and make a better future for all the youngsters. And thanks for listening to me. I've enjoyed the conversation. It's been lovely.
The leader of the task force, I believe. Thanks, Mick. Thanks, Mick. We really appreciate your time.
Okay, I'll go and get my tea now. Thanks ever so much.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye-bye.